This is the only horror movie I dare not watch with my eyes open. The woman was only away for a few minutes, but her son was crushed to pieces by the wardrobe. Seeing this scene in front of her, she was petrified with fear. Instinctively, she tried to push open the wardrobe and move her son out, but the wardrobe remained completely immobile. Since then, Adnan has been experiencing various strange occurrences. She often sees the black-clothed figures appearing before her, but they vanish immediately when she tries to get a clear look. Before she could make sense of this phenomenon, another peculiar thing happened. Initially, her husband couldn't accept their son's death and was very cold towards Adnan. However, tonight, her husband's behavior was extremely unusual. He unexpectedly kissed Adnan and mentioned meeting Adnan's aunt on the way. The thing is, Adnan's aunt passed away decades ago, and Adnan herself has never even met her. What is her husband talking about? Shortly after, a series of knocking interrupted their conversation. Adnan opened the door and found her short-tempered husband standing there. It seems that this is the real one. But who was that person on the sofa? Adnan quickly ran over to check, but the person had already disappeared without a trace. At night, Adnan began to have nightmares. She saw a woman covered in blood giving birth in her room. Someone beside her slit the woman's abdomen, and the baby was forcibly pulled out. The pregnant woman turned her head and muttered something to Adnan. "Give me back my child!" Adnan screamed in fear, but fortunately, her husband arrived in time to calm her down and dispel the nightmare. After hearing about everything, Adnan's best friend arranged for a master to come and perform a divination for her. The master mixed Adnan's blood and talisman with water and had a spirit medium drink it. Although the medium's perception wasn't crystal clear, he revealed the most crucial information. Adnan's family had been cursed with the most malicious curse. In order to understand the whole story, Adnan immediately went back home and began to inquire about her aunt from her mother. Her mother started to recount with a pained expression. It turned out that Adnan's aunt's family was once very happy, but for some unknown reason, her uncle suddenly brutally killed their two daughters with his own hands, and then set himself on fire. The entire family was wiped out. However, Adnan still didn't understand the connection between this curse and her son. The man heard strange voices at the grave. It was his deceased child calling out to him, asking him to come down and be with him. The man couldn't control himself, and with a smile, he took his own life. Meanwhile, strange things were happening at Adnan's place. Adnan's mother discovered that the wardrobe suddenly emitted voices, as if someone inside was calling her. This time, it was not her imagination. With courage, she walked up to the wardrobe, accompanied by the sound of crying, tremblingly opened the door, only to find her deceased sister and the children inside. Her sister yelled, demanding that she return the child to her. Feeling guilty, Adnan, terrified and shaken to her core, it seemed that they were definitely hiding something from Adnan. Meanwhile, Adnan, in order to uncover the truth, decided to visit her aunt's house. Despite being dissuaded by passersby and warned of the haunting, Adnan was determined to go. Even if it meant risking her own life, she needed to find out what happened to her kid. Indeed, Adnan's aunt's house was as eerie and terrifying as the rumors had suggested. The house, uninhabited for decades, resembled more of a ruin than a dwelling. With courage, Adnan proceeded forward. As soon as she entered the house, the door behind her closed mysteriously, and the ordeal of escaping the haunted house began. The first attack came in the form of a foul stench permeating the room, while bloodstains throughout the house resembled a crime scene. Shortly after, Adnan heard her sons crying once again. She reached the bedroom, and the sound was coming from under the blanket. Holding her breath, Adnan lifted the blanket directly, only to find a terrifying doll inside. But suddenly, two children appeared behind her. Frightened, Adnan hurriedly ran away. But in an instant, objects in the house started flying around, as if caught in a tornado. Adnan, who had survived the ordeal, called her husband, unaware that he had already taken his own life. She hurriedly returned home, only to hear her sons crying as soon as she entered. Uncontrollably, she followed the sound and found herself back in the bedroom. But this scene would forever haunt her memory. Her son's grave had been moved into the house, and the black-clothed figures had also reappeared. At this moment, a woman holding a terrifying doll stood up and shouted for Adnan to return her child. Terrified, Adnan could only run frantically towards the exit. She managed to find the master, who cut open the doll, only to discover a piece of cloth inside, covered in curses, all the most malicious of spells. It seemed to be the work of her aunt. But why? What was the reason behind all of this? Adnan, who couldn't return to her mother. This Turkish horror film will definitely scare you to the point where you dare not even go to the restroom. The two sisters, one fertile and the other infertile, naturally sow the seeds of disaster. Adnan, seemingly to have a good relationship, but deep down, Adnan, when she heard that her sister, who already has two daughters, wanted to have a son, Adnan devised a plan. She told her sister that her mother-in-law was knowledgeable in witchcraft and could perform spells to help her conceive a boy. Desperate for a son, her sister never doubted the claim and went along with it wholeheartedly. The two evil women ultimately succeeded in their plan. The terrifying doll was their creation. The mother-in-law instructed Adnan, and the aunt followed the instructions without question. Soon after, the aunt became pregnant, but her husband's behavior drastically changed. He cruelly killed their two daughters and set himself on fire. This incident terrified the aunt, and she went into premature labor. To save the baby, Adnan and a baby girl was born. At this moment, Adnan had evil thoughts. She wanted to claim the baby girl as her own and directly suffocated Adnan. And this baby girl was Adnan. It turns out that Adnan, she was stunned. The person she had called mother for so many years was actually her mother's killer, and everything they had done was to take away her mother's child. She slapped the mother-in-law across the face and turned around to seek revenge on her, only to find that she was already dead. Seeing the gruesome sight, Adnan felt that it was well-deserved. Shortly after, the mother-in-law also met an unfortunate fate, but the ordeal was far from over. When Adnan returned home, she found her husband dressed in a suit. Sitting there, Adnan burst into tears, but when she turned her head, she saw her own father, mother, and sister sitting there as well. It seemed that this curse would haunt her for the rest of her life.